we were doing a lot of things on this film where people are like, don't work with kids, don't do this, don't do that. We were doing all of it and it all worked out, so I don't know. Don't let anybody tell you shouldn't or can't do something. You can find a way to make it work, if you have the right people.
My name is Wes Givens, and welcome back to the Tungsten Originals podcast. You just heard part of my conversation with Aidan Casey, writer and director of the upcoming Tungsten Original short film, Junk. Junk is a surreal horror film following one man's downward spiral in the wake of tragedy. We discussed how his experience as a producer prepared him for the role of director, the film's balance between a traditional and experimental structure, and how it felt to see it all come together after years of hard work. Today, we launched a fundraising campaign to push Junk through post-production. Help us share this film with the world by visiting the first link in the description. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. Episode 71 of the Tungsten Originals podcast. Aidan, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me, Wes.
Absolutely. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing really well. Excited to be here.
Yeah.
I was just saying this is like my Tonight Show moment. This is big for me, so I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I feel like this is a long time coming. We met because we went to the same film school at SCAD, and recently started working together on your short film Junk, which is a proud Tungsten original. So excited to have you in our lineup. And, I'm excited to talk about that and all the short films that you've produced and, your whole journey through SCAD and that kind of stuff. But before we dive into that, I want to learn a little bit more about like how you got into filmmaking, because I personally we haven't really talked about that. I feel like, about your journey and stuff. So how did you find yourself into this art form?
I think where I first found interest is very similar to a lot of other film school kids. I was really into Star Wars as a kid, but it wasn't the movies themselves that really got me into it. It was that the DVD collections had all of these really great behind the scenes featurettes, and I would just devour those things growing up. And that's really what got me interested in filmmaking and made me realize that people actually make these things.
Right. Yeah.
And from there, I sort of just started recording things. I actually have it right here on this little DV camera. This is my
awesome
camera. I still have it with me.
That's great.
And just with stuffed animals and stuff, I was pretty young. And then as I grew up, I got more interested in music and writing throughout like middle school and high school, and eventually got a job at this art house theater that was outside of Chicago. And that's what really kind of reignited my love for film as I was starting to decide what college I wanted to go to. Like, okay, I really do want to do this. So that's what I decided to go to SCAD and really pursue it.
Yeah.
So my background was more in writing and, I did creative writing, poetry, that kind of thing, and then transitioned into screenwriting and producing, directing.
Gotcha. So whenever you went to SCAD, like as a freshman, you knew right away that you wanted to be in those writer, director, producer type of positions?
Yes, but I didn't have any sort of grasp on what that exactly meant.
Right.
I think when I got to school, I was surprised by the breadth of knowledge that a lot of the other students had. And I was a little intimidated by it. Because a lot of kids had already shot a few short films or had been in festivals and that kind of thing. And I wasn't really expecting that. And I think I was originally a double major. I was a film and dramatic writing major. And I did that for about a year and a half and realized I didn't want to be in school for like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was like, I realized that I felt like I was learning more just being on set than I was in the classroom for film. So I made film my minor and dramatic writing my major. because I think I was more comfortable with writing because I was more in line with what my background was. And then kind of in my junior year, I started realizing I really had interest in producing and wanted to pursue directing. So I doubled down on the film thing even more.
Right.
And just in all of my free time, produced senior films, directing the narratives, worked on my own experimental projects, and was doing all my dramatic writing requirements as well.
Yeah.
So
I think if I was to do scat over, I'd probably do the same thing, a dramatic writing major and a film minor, because writing is something that's way more fit for a classroom than, your regular like production kind of stuff. The only point, or I
yeah,
shouldn't say the only point, but like the point of those classrooms is to create projects that you have to be on set for. And being on set is where you like really learn everything. So I think that's a good way to do it.
yeah. I mean, it worked out. I think if I had done it the other way, I would have just ended up spending a lot of my time writing too, because
Right.
that's just sort of whatever I'm in school for. I end up finding something else interesting. It's just how I am. So I don't know. It worked out for me.
Yeah.
It was a good path, and yeah, I mean, the dramatic writing faculty were really the real reason I decided to go down that track. Because they were great and so supportive, and it's a fairly small major, so you have a lot
Right.
of you can build personal relationships with them, and I really enjoyed my time there. Treated me very well.
I mean, I think Professor Sadwith, who was or is a professor at SCAD, he does a lot of film classes and some writing classes. I think I remember him talking in like our intro to screenwriting class. If you want to be a director, you have to be a writer, or that is a way. That's how he became a director. Is he started writing. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people who are like considering film school because they want to be a director, which is virtually everybody, I think a really good idea is to go down the writing path and then just like be on set as much as you can, because writing is you have to do it like over and over and over and over again. And to be in that classroom setting where you have people like critiquing your scripts and stuff is really healthy. So I just think that's a solid way to do it. Like my good friend Brooks McMahon, who has been on the podcast many, many times, was film, changed to dramatic writing. Seems like a good idea. So
I remember in my Film 100 class, I had Shuttle. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
yeah, Shodel.
But
Yeah.
he said there's only two ways you can become a director, and that's being a writer or being an actor. And I had no acting experience, so I was like, all right, I'll continue with the writing thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really helpful because I think, have a very different perspective on story. You have a much
Right.
more nuts and bolts sort of perspective on it. And within the dramatic writing major, you end up learning a lot about structure and, the different forms that takes in different genres, different formats of screenwriting, pilots, features. And that having that base knowledge encouraged me to write projects that were much more out of the box and loosely structured, because I kind of wanted to get out of that mold. And
Right.
I think Junk kind of fell within that spectrum of projects, but also, there was a structure there in the screenplay, but it's very sort of loose. And other projects I produced, like Wild Wild Us, was something I was attracted to because it was more of a poetic screenplay than like a narrative driven one.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was looking at your website earlier, and it is really interesting, this through line of the experimental form and breaking that mold. That mold is like throughout your work. You know what I mean? So is the breaking that structure the main appeal to you, or whenever you started becoming a writer and a producer, like what was it that drew you to those out of the box films? Because that's very different than something like a Blueberries, which is quote unquote more traditional and has that structure and is just like a family drama, obviously way different than Junk. So what drew you to that?
That's hard to say, but I think breaking the structure is a part of it, but also I just am drawn to unique visions. And with Wild All Dust, Julia Corrin wrote and directed it. I ended up co-writing it. the vision was there from the very beginning, and
Right.
we had worked on other projects before that, and the specificity of it was very attractive to me. And I felt like I hadn't really seen anything quite like what she was trying to do before.
Hmm.
So I think that was really attractive to me in terms of that project. But yeah, I think you're right. There is that through line, but I think part of that comes because I'm kind of intimidated by truly narrative projects, because there's an art to that. Having come from a screenwriting background, there's an art to crafting a narrative that is it's very delicate, and you need to hit like a series of beats to lead to an emotional climax. And don't if you get it wrong, it's just going to fall flat. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's almost more intimidating to me than taking on a project where it's like it's more intuitive and sort of poetic, and is more up to interpretation, and sort of breaks that form. Which isn't to say that one is better than the other, of course,
Yeah,
but like
totally.
it's I think I'm a little intimidated by like straight narrative projects. So that's why with Junk, it was bordering on sort of an experimental form, but I tried to push myself to keep it in a narrative mold and in the genre mold of horror, to challenge myself and really try to tackle that. Because also I didn't take directing the narrative in school. Any project I worked on or directed before this was like a passion project, or I was doing it for another friend's like producing class or something like that. So I didn't really have that sort of background knowledge in terms of directing a narrative. So this was kind of me pushing myself to try to fit more into that mold.
I do want to dive into Wild Wild Us a little bit, because that is a short that I'm really, really a big fan of. And we actually had Julia on before y'all even shot, like it seems like forever ago, whenever I was doing a
I
series
think
of
that was
people like,
when we were doing the Indiegogo.
yeah, exactly. It was fall of 2019, or fall or winter of 2019, whenever everyone was like raising their money. And it's such an interesting like idea. And so for people who haven't heard that episode, could you explain a little bit about Wild Wild Us and what that film is about?
So Wild Wild Us is about three friends who get lost in the woods and sort of embark on this existential journey and try to come closer to their sense of identity. It's a beautiful and really poetic film, and we'll be releasing it online soon, actually.
Awesome.
So people will have access to see it. I mean, I have a lot of fondness for that project.
Yeah.
I made it with some really great people. I'm very thankful that Julia brought me on to produce it, and it was kind of the first project I had done where I was like at the center, not the center of it, but like I was part of that core team
Totally.
from the very beginning until the very end. And that was like an incredibly fulfilling experience, and it's really cemented for me that this is what I wanted to do. And it also taught me a lot about how to work with people in a producer role, but also just in a sort of like in a creative way. And that film is really special to me. I think I'm really happy with how it turned out. And man, it's just about some friends getting lost in the woods, getting wild, getting weird.
Yeah, exactly. So as a producer, when you're approaching a project like that is poetic and ethereal and breaks the mold, when you're reading the script and you're talking to the director about the concept, like how do you think about what can I bring to the table as a producer? Because I feel like it would be harder to produce a project like that versus that more traditional sense that we were talking about, because I mean, I don't know what the script looked like for Wild Wild Us, but I know that there's things that happen in the moment, and you can come up with things on set, and it's more free flowing. So what do you think is like the most important thing to keep in mind as a producer when you're working on those kinds of projects with filmmakers who like to kind of get in that free flow form?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is what sort of structure or approach you want to take on the day, or like what I can do to support that process, that is a little bit more free flowing. And part of that was talking to our AD on the project, Kara, who's I think also a friend of the podcast,
Big friend.
and and sort of discussing with her what approach she would take on the day in terms of, scheduling the shoot, and then making sure that all the resources were there for them to have sort of the most free-flowing kind of creative potential that they can.
Right.
In pre-production, we did a lot of like, Julia and I went over the script and tried to sort of get the like tone or the exact moments that she wanted to get those as specific as possible, so that on the day she knew like sort of the acorn of whatever that inspiration was, and then she can kind of build it out around it. And we went into it with a lot of prep. Like Evan McCormick was the DP. Those guys like did a couple drafts of a shot list, and so it wasn't like we were going in there with absolutely no prep, but you kind of have that background knowledge of like vaguely what you want to do, and then you get there on the day and you kind of I improvise a little bit.
Right.
But that shoot was also interesting because they basically were kind of forced to make it up on the fly, because we got to the location. So we were shooting in the North Georgia wilderness, about an hour north of Atlanta. And this is in February, so it's not, we're shooting in winter, and we're in the wilderness, we're in the woods, it's in kind of a mountainous terrain. But the last thing we were expecting was snow, and apparently it hadn't snowed in this area of Georgia for a few years. So we felt solid going in that we would be fine. And of course, on our second day of shooting, it snowed like a foot or something like that. So, and the film was supposed to be sort of like a summary, summary sort of season. And I remember as the producer being like, can we swear on here?
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, we're going to have to reshoot this entire thing. We're going to have to do it again.
And another key detail, you're shooting on film.
Oh yeah, we're shooting on 16 as well.
Yeah.
So like this wasn't it was a complicated situation.
Yeah.
There were a lot of moving parts, and there was a moment on the second day, we got up that morning, everything was running really smoothly. I was driving to set with one of our actors, Ryan, who's also a really great guy. And we were the last to leave. And I remember getting calls from people, and they were like, the roads are not good right now. It's like, they're not good. 'Cause we're driving through these kind of, twisting and turning high mountain roads.
Yeah.
And like when the car starts skidding out on the road 'cause there's snow, that's a problem. And as the producer, like everybody's safety had to come first. So we got to set, and it was snowing, and it did look beautiful. And I remember Julia and the camera team wanted to really keep shooting, and I had to make the decision that we needed to go back because it wasn't safe. So we all got back to our Airbnb, and I was kind of devastated because I was like, we're screwed. This was our weekend. Like we're going to have to find another weekend. And then Jules and Evan went kind of on a little walk and came back, and we're like, no, we're just going to shoot here. We're going to shoot in like the woods behind the Airbnb, and we're going to make it work. And thank God they went on that walk, because it ended up really working for the film, and is probably one of my favorite parts in the film. And we ended up making our day too, which was good.
Yeah.
But I'm glad they did, because also little did we know that COVID was right around the corner. So if we had tried to schedule another weekend,
right,
we would
never would have gotten made.
So,
yeah.
But that's kind of that's something I learned that I really respect with those guys, and I've worked with them a lot, and really appreciate working with them, is that, like, from a producer standpoint, you're thinking like very logistically, but you have to be open to new creative possibilities, and sort of being open to your plan being kind of thrown out the window, and you just got to go with it. So that was a learning curve for me. That was a wild shoot, man. It was wild. We are some people ended up making an igloo out of all the snow that day. So we had an igloo in the front yard of our Airbnb. We were staying in this cabin, and there was just this massive igloo. And it was, I think about that shoot a lot. It was a lot of fun. And it was I think it was like the last real project I did before COVID hit too.
Yeah.
So it was, it's from a different time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I want to dive into Junk, because that is, the film that you're currently working on and that we shot back in January. So can you tell us about Junk, the story? I really want to get into the weeds with it, because I really, really love the project, and I want to share that with people.
Thank you. So Junk is a short horror film about a father who is haunted by the loss of his child, metaphorically and literally. And it's really a film about, grief and loss, but also about acceptance, and accepting that you can't change the past, and learning to kind of love yourself again. So it was a project that I had been dreaming up for a long time. The original concept for it came to me a couple years ago at this point, but it was a project that took a long time to sort of get off the ground. And I had originally planned to shoot it sort of as my final project, my final portfolio piece going out of college. And this was with the assumption that we would have access to SCAD equipment and those resources. And then COVID hit, and I wasn't really sure that I would be able to make the project for a long time. And I also wasn't sure what the future kind of held for me. For a while, I'm in New York now, and I really wanted to get there. But I didn't know how I was going to get there, or because New York was messed up very early on in COVID, really bad.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what my plan was going to be, and I ended up deciding to stay in Savannah for almost another year. And eventually I was like, this is the last chance I'm going to have to make to do this project probably for the next couple of years, just because of the logistics of it. I wouldn't be able to do it once I moved to New York. With this network of people that I kind of knew, and then in Savannah, this would be my last chance to really do a project in Savannah. So eventually I said, we're going to do it. And I approached Joe Lee, who's a really talented filmmaker, a really good friend of mine, and to be the lead producer on the film and the editor. We had worked together a bunch in the past, and then we ended up bringing it to you. We brought it to Lauren, to Reagan, and from there we just sort of went with it. And it was, it was not considering everything we were up against.
Yeah.
To make this film, the scale of it and the state of the world, you know. I'm really proud of the team, of everybody involved, that we were able to get through production and make it happen. Because you remember that we had to delay production a couple times after we had decided to move forward with it in September of 2020, I think. We were originally going to shoot in December, and then we decided to shoot in early January, and then a couple weeks out, the pandemic was just getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And a couple of our crew members got sick, and we were like, okay, let's delay it one more time. And we decided to go end of January, and we all had our fingers crossed, and luckily we made it through. And I'm really, and now we're in post. And that the interesting part now is that now that I moved out of Savannah, and Joe is still based in Savannah, he's still in school. I'm in New York. I'm starting to work, sort of coordinating schedules and really taking the time to get into the nuts and bolts of the edit. It's been a little bit of a hurdle, but it's moving smoothly and it's going well. So yeah, it's been an uphill battle to get this thing made from the get-go, but yeah, I don't know. It's a passion project. You know, I'm very glad that Tungsten wanted to be a part of it, and all of our other wonderful collaborators and crew members on this thing. I really could not have had a better group of people come on to help make this project. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, and you know, I think we all came on, of course, obviously we trust you as a filmmaker and want to work with you, but I personally was really blown away by the script, and I feel like you can tell when you read a script by a writer versus a director. And that's kind of a weird thing to say, but like, you're a very good writer. And so I really, really enjoyed the script, and I actually like felt like the horrific nature of it, and it like really impacted me when I read it, which is, I think, saying something, because it's just kind of words on a page, but I could like see it and feel it. So I do want to dive into the script, because you're a great screenwriter, and obviously that's like where you're more classically trained from school. So why write the script as that kind of middle ground between the traditional narrative and the experimental stuff that you're more used to? Like, because I know that you kind of wanted to challenge yourself in that way, to tell the story in that way.
I think that the nature of the story, I always try to go back to what the nature of the story is and what form it wants to take, and not try to force it into any particular mold. And the way my writing process works is usually I'll do like a treatment and just sort of write everything out in prose, and then kind of just do one pass. If it's a short, just do one pass and write the whole first draft just in one sitting based off the treatment, and that'll sort of dictate the rhythm of it. And then I'll just sort of tweak things from there. So that's kind of the form it took originally. When and it changed a lot over the years writing this project. Originally, I think it was more of a narrative, and then it got more experimental, and then it kind of came back around to becoming more of a narrative toward the end. And I think that's because the nature of the story about a father who is experiencing this sort of sense of loss and going through the events of the story, I think that warranted sort of more of a classical treatment to it,
Right.
because it's like a very sad, serious subject matter. So I wanted to do it justice in trying to keep more of a traditional narrative mold on it and keep that classical approach, as opposed to like, which isn't to say that you couldn't do that sort of story justice in a more abstract experimental form. but I didn't want to shy away from it at all.
Right.
You know, I didn't want to sort of hide behind like this experimental mold. So that's kind of where that came from, trying to push myself to do that. And of course, like, just because I am who I am and I write kind of absurd, surreal things, that's where those other elements kind of found their way in, just because that's just me, you know.
Do you think working on Wild Wild Us and the things that y'all went through and all the obstacles that you overcame, and also being a co-writer and, like you said, one of the people at the core of that project, do you think that sets you up to be more confident to work on Junk? Because, I mean, just so everyone knows, like, Junk, there was a pretty big undertaking, like you were saying. I mean, obviously filming during COVID, it was also like the worst time of COVID in Georgia. Like, if you look at the charts, it was the worst. It was the time in which COVID was the worst there. But also, like, a bigger budget and a bigger crew, and you're building sets and all this kind of stuff. So do you think Wild Wild Us sets you up in a way?
Yeah, I think that having the chaos of Wild Wild Us was, and I mean that in the most beautiful and endearing way, like the chaos of what that shoot was kind of prepared me for what the chaos of this film would be, in a lot of ways. And it gave me a lot of confidence, I think, as an actual like filmmaker, because before that, like I had said, I'd been doing a lot of smaller projects that were just me and a couple friends. And then Wild Wild Us was like a kind of the first real substantial thing I had been involved with from beginning until end. And then, yeah, so it definitely gave me a lot of confidence. And seeing Julia and what her approach to directing was also very, gave me a lot of insight. And through that gave me confidence, because the way she was able to sort of handle all the shit that went wrong on that set and take it in jest, and then still be able to create a beautiful product out of it. I was like, okay, well, if she can do that when we're dealing with a foot of snow and we're outside in the wilderness, I can do this when we all just have to wear, masks and take some safety procedures.
Right.
And I think I think it prepared me for how ambitious this project was. But the project also, Junk, kind of like grew in scale almost as pre-production began. Because when we first started, it was originally going to be a much smaller thing.
Yeah.
And as we got deeper into pre-production, we sort of realized, like, okay, so we are going to, because of the nature of the story, we are going to have to build a set for the nursery in the film. And we're like, okay, so how are we going to do that? And Lauren Batista, one of the other producers on the film, brought on Lila, who's our production designer, and she gave me all the confidence in the world that we were going to be able to build it and do it. And she absolutely killed it. And so part of the confidence came from my background, but the other part of it definitely came from having like a really good, solid group of people we were working with on it, and believing in their ability, and being able to kind of, for the first time, sort of step back and take more of like the creative role as opposed to a logistical one. I mean, I ended up sort of in the background helping with logistics and stuff as we got closer to the shoot, but I was really thankful because I was able to focus on a lot of the creative aspect, or all of the creative aspects of it.
Did you find yourself at all wishing that you could be more involved in the logistics, or were you kind of relishing that you got to be a director instead of a producer?
Both. One thing that I maybe was struggling with was like questioning how, as a director, how involved should I be with the logistics of everything? Because I didn't want to, coming from a producing background, I didn't want to be overbearing and like, sort of loom over all the producers. So I tried to take more of like a step back. But in other ways, maybe I think maybe I should have been a little more forward with trying to help make the logistical things happen. But I think I think I was there, and maybe I'm just
Yeah,
being hard on
definitely.
myself. But you know, I think I was really trying to relish like you said, the creative process of it.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, that was a learning curve for me because
Hmm.
uh, all the projects I'd done before this were my involvement was, there was a creative aspect to it, but it was much more logistically involved. So this was
Right.
taking that step back was a little bit of a strain on me, I think.
Hmm.
But I grew out of it and ended up working out.
Yeah, exactly. It was really funny. Reagan, who is, of course, a producer at Tungsten and was a producer on Junk, she became a producer on Junk before she was at Tungsten. But we would have like producers meeting. It'd be all of us. And of course, you'd be there. And we'd all just be talking about updates and everything. And you would kind of just like sit there and just like consume it. And we could never tell if you were furious or confident or whatever. And so Reagan and I would often have we would have meetings after a Junk meeting where it'd just be her and I, and of course we're talking about Tungsten and everything, and I'd be like, is he good? Like, not in a necessarily a bad way, but like, what's going through his mind? Like, we really could not tell what it was like. And then we were hanging out at Kara's apartment, and I told you that, and it was just very funny. It was never like, we never thought badly of you or like it made us angry.
No.
We were just worried that we weren't doing a good job.
No, that's just, dude, that's just like me. I don't know, man. That's just my face, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's what's funny is that after the meeting or at the end of the meeting, I'd be like, Aidan, how are you feeling? And you'd be like, awesome, I'm really excited. And you would perk up when prompted. It was just, it is funny, that dichotomy of going from producer to director,
A lot of those times I just had my, had my thinking cap on, you know?
Totally.
But one thing I learned throughout the process of doing Junk, especially in the role of a director, was like, I was learning that you have to really exude a vibe. You're curating the vibe of the film itself, but also whatever the atmosphere of the crew and everything is, that's going to find its way into the film as well and into the culture of the production. So I learned that like I need to be positive and confident and all these things, which I am internally, but I'm also very shy. So it can be difficult for me to like, sort of give off that vibe sometimes. So, and it's also difficult because we were all remote. I mean, we were working on this thing. Everybody was remote. Really, nobody was in the same room together up until maybe like a week before production started. So that was another thing where it's like, you have to remember, I'm like, oh, everybody can see me right now. Like I need to, like, you know what I mean? But no, I mean, I had like I said, I had all the confidence in the world in you guys. And like, couldn't be more happy with how things went,
Man, I wished so much that I could be on set. I was so bummed that I couldn't be there. Because those small, like I'm so excited to get back on those small sets. You know what I mean? After working just yesterday, when we're recording this, I finished, they wrapped Law & Order SVU season 22. So I'm unemployed now. I'm not working on that show anymore. But after being on that huge corporate show with 300 people working on it and all that kind of stuff, it made me really want to get on those small sets. Not that they're necessarily better or worse, but I was drawn to like be on set again, not as a COVID PA, not asking people to send me through questions and taking temperatures and that kind of stuff. So that's in that same conversation about going from producer to director. Since I directed the third episode of Reconnection, which is Seth Cunningham's project. He's been on the show a couple times. I didn't write that, but I directed the third episode. Since then, I haven't directed anything, of my own. I've been a producer helping a lot of people through Tungsten and that kind of stuff, but I'm so excited to relish in the creative part of it, because that's really my flow state, you know what I mean? But I want to get into your head a little bit. Like, you get to set, and you've been working on this project for years. You originally wrote it a couple years ago, and of course we both know all of the different hurdles that we had to overcome to make it. We delayed shooting 3 times almost, and all this kind of stuff. And then specifically, I want to go to the warehouse where they built the set, because that's got to be an interesting feeling to show up and have this set built from scratch. Fun fact, in the exact same storage unit that they built the set for Pink in, which is also a Tungsten original, the exact same storage unit. And I just kind of want to know how it feels to show up and have this thing that's been built for you and for your idea. This idea that you wrote a couple years ago is now like literal and in front of you.
Yeah.
Take me there.
It was it was really like a transcendent feeling. It was funny because because of the timeline and just some events that ended up happening, I didn't see the set until the night before we were supposed to shoot. So
I forgot that.
I was like, I know this thing is going to come together. And then I wouldn't have even seen it the night before, but Joe, Lee, and I had to go drop some stuff off there after we wrapped the first location. So we just went into the unit, and I had seen the structure of it being built, sort of like sort of at different points in the process.
Right.
So I'd like seen it was almost like a little house, because it was more complicated than like a normal set. It wasn't just flats. Like, we built a roof structure on it because we wanted this sort of like peaked roof to create this shape. So when I walked into it for the first time, I was like, it was like walking into a church or something.
Yeah.
It was like the atmosphere was just there. And
right.
Yeah, Lila and her team killed it. It was I was really amazed and really invigorated by it and incredibly excited. And that next day when we showed up to shoot, it was just kind of it was lucky because we had already been in the flow of everything, because we'd been shooting for a couple days prior to that. And it was like perfectly, the space was a little cramped, but otherwise it was pretty much perfectly suited for us. And it was like stepping into another world going in there. Yeah. And it was really an amazing feeling. It really felt like the film was like there, and we just had to grab it. You know what I mean? Just based on the space itself. So, and I feel like when you're doing independent short form, like especially student or like straight out of college sort of work, a lot of the times not as much attention can be paid on to the production design than you would ideally like. So with this film, it was incredibly important, just because of the nature of the story, that the production design is really on point. And Lila and her team delivered, and it was amazing. It was an amazing feeling walking in there for the first time. It was amazing being in there and working in there. I feel like that's really when I started to hit my stride as a director, when we moved into the unit and started working on the set. Yeah.
It was so cool to, like you said, watch the process and then see the final product, because when you're in pre-production for so long, I feel like you can just, from a producer's standpoint, but also probably from a director's standpoint, like, you just get so concerned about the next day. And I mean, I was like Reagan and I were the COVID people, so we're worried about testing and taking temperatures and like, is it gonna work? Is it gonna work? And I think those are the moments where you kind of peek your head above sand and you're like, we're making a movie. This is awesome. Yeah. And I think you need to feel that, because you want to enjoy it, and it's good to remind yourself like that, even though it's logistically a nightmare and really difficult to do, and it'd be easier if you never wanted to make a movie again. Like those are the moments that's at least I feel like why we show up and why we go through all of the hurdles, because then it's your vision is coming to life, and that's just a beautiful thing that a lot of people can't say. So it was so cool to see. I want to talk about your relationship with your cast, because you were the casting director for Blueberries and did a fantastic job casting them, and I'm so glad that the original cast is still able to, you know, be in this this shoot that we're doing in June in a couple of months. And I loved working with you in that capacity. You obviously have a really good eye for actors and like who's right for the role. So how did that experience affect casting Junk, but also affect your relationship working with them? Because you had two twin kids working on it. So, you know, working with kids can be difficult, but how was it working with your actors? Like, what's your approach to that?
From the get-go, we were set up really well for casting because we were collaborating with Jewel Hamrick, who I had worked with. He's been on the podcast.
Yeah, he has been. Yeah.
I think you guys have worked together in the past, and he's a great guy. I worked with him in the SCAD casting office, so I knew his ability, and he had a great eye and great work ethic. So I really wanted to work with him on the project, and he really came through, especially in the beginning. In our first meeting, we were discussing what form is this going to take? Are we going to do an in-person casting session? And then what would the logistics of that be because of COVID? Okay, are we going to do it online? Are we going to do self-tapes? And he handled everything very gracefully and brought on an awesome selection of people. I think ultimately our lead for the role of Lenny, Russell Sheely, came to us through an open call. But he had worked on several other like SCAD related projects in the past, I think. And so he from the get-go was you could just tell his talent. It was leaping out of him. And I learned later on when we got closer to shooting that he wasn't classically trained and didn't really have any sort of formal background in acting, and he had just kind of gotten into it a couple years prior and just been doing it regularly and found his passion in it and was incredibly talented.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible considering his performance.
Yeah. And I mean, the dude, I'm in awe of him because his process, I don't want to do it any injustice by trying to describe it here because that wouldn't, I would butcher it, but like his process is really raw and fascinating and worked especially well for this character and what this character's experience was. And working with him was amazing. It was so fulfilling. What I really liked about that process is that we were always trying to find like the truth of whatever the moment we were shooting was, and not trying to sort of fit it into something it wasn't trying to be. We weren't trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And he was really a help to me because that's always his perspective. And I think as a director, sometimes you can kind of get lost in, okay, like what's the shot? What's what are we doing? There's so many moving pieces that you can the performance can kind of get lost. And
right.
So he was very grounding in that way in his process and what he brought to the film. And his life experience as well. He's older than me and had sort of been a father figure in a family unit before, and so he brought sort of a background knowledge. I don't know necessarily if he tapped into that for the film, but he had sort of a breadth of experience that me as a younger person, I was not able to bring to it. So that also made it a much more fruitful collaboration. And yeah, man, he was just a joy to work with. And he also, like, his for lack of a better term, his vibe on set was incredibly constructive and positive, and he was always down for all the crazy things that we had to do to get this thing made. And that was an amazing, really fruitful experience. I also, you know, I hadn't had much experience working with actors up until this point. Other
Mm,
stuff I had directed had been more um, working with like non-actors and that kind of thing. So somebody who did it professionally coming on set, it brought an air of one, like professionalism, but also just, you know, this really fruitful creative experience.
mm,
It was a learning experience for me, and it was incredibly fruitful.
mm.
And working with the twins, Eitan and Matan, those guys are they're true professionals as well.
Yeah.
They had been doing
They also dealt with a lot.
yeah, really they had to do some like special effects makeup for the film, and
Yeah.
they're, you know, these are 3 4 year old kids, and they really came through for us, and did a great job, and it was a lot of fun and really fulfilling working with them as well. um, you know, a bit of a learning curve,
Right.
but of course for me more so.
There's a
And
great BTS picture. We'll throw it on screen. It's of you holding one of them and talking to Lenny, I think. It's such a great, I love that picture.
yeah, it was a lot of fun having the kids on set. I mean,
Mhm.
of course, when you have kids on set, especially really young kids, they're it changes the workflow, you know.
Right.
So you really have to be like, you have to be on top of your shit, but you also have to be really adaptable. And
Mm.
that's a testament to um, our special effects makeup artist Bailey and her assistant Lily on the film, and also our AD Sasha, and how
Yeah.
they were able to make it work with what the kids needed and the time they needed to get ready, and all of that, and then making it work within the amount of time we had with them on set, because you're
Mm.
limited to a certain amount of time. So yeah, it all went beautifully, and
Yeah.
it was fulfilling. I mean, we were doing a lot of things on this film where people are like, "Don't work with kids. Don't do
Right.
this. Don't do that." We were doing all of it, and it all
Yeah.
worked out. You know, so I don't know. Don't let anybody tell you you shouldn't or can't do something. You can find a way to make it work,
Yeah.
um, if you have the right people.
Absolutely. And you know, those 6 days of production came and went, and now you're in post production, sadly, still
Mhm.
remote. How does it feel to see it come together? I know sometimes as a director, it can be exciting, but like, I think there's some director, famous director quote that's like, every director should hate their first cut. Like, if you don't hate it, if you're not worried that the film is ruined or whatever, then it's not going well, because you have this perfect view in your head, and sometimes it may not live up to that. But how does it feel to be in post production right now?
It feels I'm very pleased to be in post production, because we immediately after we wrapped, which was like June 26th or something, very end of June,
January, yeah.
or January, excuse me. I had to move out of Savannah. I moved back home for a month, and Joe Lee, who is a producer on the film, the editor, who's also a great director in his own right, had to shoot, he was still in school, had to shoot his senior like within a month after that. So there was a lot of, we basically, and then, you know, I ended up being at home, and I had some responsibilities at home I had to take care of, and then I moved out here to New York. And so it's been a lot of like, we had to take an extended break, because it just, we wouldn't have been able to dedicate the time
Right.
to it that we would have needed. So now that things are settling down a little bit, only just now starting to settle down, because really since we wrapped Drunk, it's been like one thing after the other, basically, which has been really exciting, but also a little constricting in terms of how much time we've been able to dedicate to it. But now that things are starting to settle down, I'm really excited, because we're actually really starting to now be able to do like a real deep dive into it. And yeah, you know, there is that first cut that you're like, oh, I don't know. But
Uh-oh.
you know, things, yeah, you got to get the shape the shape of it right, and then you can start molding it, So, and then it starts slowly to become closer and closer to the vision. And like you said, I don't think you're ever going to match exactly what was in your head, and you have to be adaptable. And that goes back to Wild Wild Us too, like what I learned working on that project. You have to be adaptable, and things are going to change, and the project is going to it's going to be what it was supposed to be. It's never going to be what you wrote in that first draft however many years ago. It's never going to be even what you thought on set, what you were trying to do. The edit is a process I really enjoy because, there's some quote where it's like you have 3 stages of writing. There's the script when you're on set, and the final rewrite is in the edit bay. So yeah, it's kind of a beautiful process, and you have to like, you're kind of like, what's the thing? Kill your darlings. You have to like remove yourself from it and really look at it objectively and from like an audience perspective, and decide what's going to be powerful and what you need to change and how you can manipulate it to be the best thing that it can be. It might be different from what you had originally set out to make. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now. We're still fairly early in the process, just because I was telling you this before we started recording, but like logistically, Joe and I are both remote, and the rest of our post team is also remote. And so matching schedules to sit down and have time to meet, or to find the time to really get into the nuts and bolts of it, is difficult, especially when you're remote. Right. You're starting to work like I am, or you're still in school like Joe is. And of course he's working as well. So it's a process, but we're getting there, and we're starting to really get down into something that's we can really work with it. The first like rough assembly was unruly, because we got a lot of footage we shot for 6 days off a 7-page script, but there was something like 20 scenes in it, so it was an interesting from a script perspective, because as you know, the way screenplays are formatted, it's supposed to roughly come out to like a minute per page, but that's assuming that you have any dialogue in your film, and this film was all action description. Right. So we ended up shooting a 7-page script, and our first cut was like 30 minutes, so we just kind of, it's like compressing it down into the absolute concentrated version of itself.
And one of the hardest parts about that, like you said, we all know the killing your darlings thing, but it can also be kind of hard to cut a shot, and then you think back and you're like, man, it took us 3 hours to get that shot, and now we have to take it out. But that's if it's for the sake of it being better, that's what you got to do.
Yeah, and that's just part of the process, that's just what you got to do. It just comes with the territory. And I'm thankful that we had about 2.5, almost 3 months separated between wrapping production and really getting into post, because it allowed me to have a certain amount of like emotional distance from it, especially considering all the hurdles we had to go through to get this thing through production. Having that distance gave me more of an objective eye to be able to look at the film with.
Definitely.
So sometimes maybe it's worth taking time away from the project before you jump into post.
I totally think so. I think that's a good time to reset and get into that more objective mindset. Because then it's not like you just wrapped, you've taken a couple months and you've matured as a person and you've gone through these life experiences. And so now you get to look at it like, not that it's someone else's film, but it's just like, you can kind of separate yourself in a healthy way.
I mean, in a certain way, eventually you have to let it go. It's not really going to be your film after a certain point. It's going to be for an audience, So you I think I've had to stop thinking about it as being my film, think about it in that romantic way, because, somebody's got to see it at some point, and I can, I have to think about it from what's going to be most effective from an audience perspective. and just fitting that through whatever my lens is and Joe's creative lens. And
Definitely. So you're in post-production now, and the film is coming together more and more every day. And, I guess you're kind of starting to see the wealth of what you're able to accomplish with all of the hurdles that we had to overcome. So what's the one thing that you're taking away from Junk that will always be close to you as you move into your next production, whenever that is?
I think having trust in your team is incredibly important. If you don't have trust, then either there's something wrong with you or there's something wrong with your team and you need to fix it. And I am naturally a little bit of a control freak, so especially coming from like a producer background, so letting go a little bit and having trust in everybody we were working with, George, Lila, the producing team, Sasha, our AD, sort of letting go and having trust that, of course, they're the best people right now for doing what they're going to do, and having confidence in your team. I think that was really what I took away from it.
Well, this is an exciting episode because, one, you've been, I feel like this is a long time coming, you being on the podcast after we've been working together. But two, the Indiegogo campaign for Junk is live. We just need a little extra funds to push this film through the finish line and, send it to the festivals you want to send it to and all that kind of stuff. So if you are so inclined after listening to this episode, you should go to the first link in the description. And, if you make a contribution, it will go a long way. Every little bit helps. We're not trying to raise a ton of money, so it's an achievable goal. But we just need a little bit to, get over the hump. So links to that are in the description. Aidan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really fun discussion. I look forward to, the next thing you make and hopefully being a part of it in any way that I can. I'm really, really proud of Junk being a Tungsten project. Really wish I was on set, but I can just tell that the energy y'all were able to create on set was really positive and healthy, and it led to a really, really good project, and that was well written from the beginning. So very proud to be a part of it, even in this small way that I'm a part of it. And I just can't wait to send it to some festivals and get it in front of other people,
Yeah, thanks so much, West.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone, the next episode of the podcast comes out at 9 a.m. on Mondays. Also, be sure to check out the video version on our YouTube channel if you didn't know we're doing those. And links to all the Junk stuff, all the Tungsten stuff will be in the description. And thank you guys for listening. See you in the next one.